The room went silent when my mother said it. Phoebe just looks more like a bride than you do. Aria! For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. But then I saw my father nod in quiet agreement, the same way he always did when he didn't want to challenge her. The air in the dining room turned heavy, the flickering light from the chandelier reflecting off the pearl-studded Juliet cap resting in my mother's hands like some sacred relic. That heirloom had been promised to me since I was 10 years old, a symbol of everything I'd ever wanted to belong to: family, love, legacy. But now, sitting across from them at the long mahogany table, it felt like I'd been written out of my own family history. The laughter from the kitchen still echoed faintly from when Phoebe had tried on the cap earlier, her voice bright and carefree as she admired herself in the mirror. I remembered standing outside the doorway watching my mother's hands adjust the cap on her head, whispering, "You were born to wear this." Those words carved into me like glass. I didn't even realize I'd stepped forward until my mother's reflection caught sight of me. Her face shifted, the warmth fading as quickly as it had appeared. "Oh, Aria," she said, feigning surprise. "We were just reminiscing. You never showed much interest in the family heirlooms, did you?" My throat tightened. "You promised it to me," I said quietly, barely recognizing my own voice. "Grandma did. You told me it would be mine when I got married." Phoebe turned, her hair spilling over her shoulders in a cascade of perfectly styled curls. "You never mentioned wanting it," she said lightly, her tone dismissive but her smile sharp. "And besides, it suits me better, don't you think?" The room seemed to shrink around me. My father shifted in his chair, avoiding eye contact. My mother sighed like I was being dramatic. "Sweetheart, this isn't about favoritism. It's about tradition. The cap goes to the daughter who carries herself with grace, who understands what it represents." Grace. That word, so often weaponized in our home, meant obedience. Measured words. Perfect posture, no confrontation. Phoebe had mastered it. I never could. I wanted to scream, to throw the heirloom across the room, to tell them all what a cruel joke this was. Instead, I just stood there, my hands trembling as I remembered another Sunday afternoon long ago, kneeling beside my grandmother's cedar chest, her wrinkled fingers placing that very cap on my head. "You'll wear this one day, my Aria," she'd said with a smile that still glowed in my memory. "It'll make you feel like yourself, not like someone else's idea of who you should be." I swallowed hard, the image blurring as my mother's voice pulled me back to the present. "Don't make this bigger than it is," she said, her tone clipped. "It's just a piece of jewelry." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. To her, it was never just anything. It was about control. How we dressed, who we dated, what emotions we were allowed to show. I looked at Phoebe again, who now stood in front of the mirror, tilting her head, admiring how the pearls caught the light. "Don't worry," she said with a smirk. "I'll take good care of it until you have a daughter who might want to wear it someday." My chest tightened so sharply it hurt. I excused myself before I could break down in front of them. The air outside was cool, carrying the faint scent of the roses my mother pruned obsessively every morning. I got into my car, but my hands were shaking too much to start it. How had I become the outsider in my own family story? That night I called Daniel, my fiancé, and told him everything. There was silence on the other end of the line, then his voice, calm but firm. "You don't need their permission to be happy, Aria." But he didn't understand. It wasn't about the cap. It was about every dinner where my achievements were brushed aside for Phoebe's, every time I'd been told I was too blunt, too practical, too different. My mother didn't see me as a bride because I wasn't her version of feminine perfection. I hung up, my heart pounding with humiliation and anger. The next day, I went to see Aunt Vivian, my grandmother's sister, the only person in the family who ever really saw me. Her farmhouse smelled like lavender and old wood, the kind of place where the air itself seemed to remember. She poured us tea and listened as I explained everything. When I finished, she stood and disappeared into the hallway, returning with a weathered hat box. "Your grandmother would have wanted you to have this," she said softly, handing it to me. Inside wasn't the cap, but a stack of letters bound with a faded ribbon. The handwriting was unmistakably my grandmother's. My hands shook as I unfolded the first page. "The Juliet cap should grace my first granddaughter's wedding day," it read. "Little Aria has her heart set on it, and I've promised it to her. Make sure Patricia remembers this when the time comes." I read it again and again, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. Vivian watched me quietly, her face soft with something between sadness and pride. "Your mother always wanted things her way," she said. "She's rewritten plenty of family history to make herself comfortable. But the truth's right here, Aria." I pressed the letter to my chest, the weight of betrayal settling heavier than ever. When I showed my parents the letters the next evening, my mother barely glanced at them. "You're misinterpreting," she said coldly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Your grandmother didn't mean it literally." "She named me," I said, my voice shaking. "She wrote it in her own hand." My father cleared his throat. "Aria, it's not worth fighting over. You could just buy another headpiece. There are plenty that look similar." The words cut deeper than I expected. Similar. As if history, meaning, and love could be replicated in a bridal shop display. Phoebe walked in midway through the conversation, taking one look at the letters before crossing her arms. "You're trying to ruin my wedding," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. "You've always been jealous." "Jealous?" I repeated, stunned. "Of what? The approval you have to earn every single day?" But she didn't hear me. None of them did. My mother gathered the letters, stacked them neatly, and handed them back to me like they were irrelevant receipts. "I'm sorry you feel slighted," she said with finality. The conversation closed. I left without another word. That night, Daniel found me sitting on the couch surrounded by those letters, staring at them like they might rewrite the story if I looked long enough. "They don't get to define you," he said, pulling me close. But the ache didn't fade. It wasn't about ownership anymore. It was about acknowledgement. About being seen. Over the next few weeks, I tried to focus on planning our wedding, but every choice felt haunted by their voices. When I picked a dress, I heard my mother's disapproval in my head. Too plain. When I chose wildflowers over roses, I imagined Phoebe's mockery. That's not elegant. It was like they'd taken residence in my mind. Then one morning, as I sat in the bridal boutique for my final fitting, the consultant asked, "Any heirlooms you'll be wearing?" The question hit me harder than I expected. My throat tightened. "No," I said after a pause. "Not this time." But as I looked at my reflection, something inside me began to shift. The gown was simple, yes, but it was mine. I wasn't wearing someone else's dream. I was wearing my own. Later that day, as I drove home, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Instagram. Phoebe had tagged me in a new post. Against my better judgment, I opened it. There she was, radiant in a bridal shop, the pearl-studded Juliet cap perched proudly on her head. The caption read, "Some traditions are meant to be honored. Family heirloom, bride-to-be." The world seemed to tilt. I could almost hear my mother's voice echoing through the screen, proud and possessive. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. I closed the app and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, my face pale, eyes glassy. For a long moment, I couldn't move. That cap, my grandmother's promise, was now just another Instagram prop. Something in me snapped quietly, not in rage, but in resolve. If that was what family tradition meant, I wanted no part of it. I didn't need their approval. I needed my peace. But deep down, I couldn't shake the thought. What if walking away meant losing them forever? I stood there for what felt like forever, the silence in my bedroom pressing against my skin like a bruise that refused to fade, my reflection staring back at me from the vanity mirror, eyes red and glassy, lips trembling between disbelief and anger, the kind that burns quietly until it finds air. Every memory of my mother's voice, every "someday this will be yours," every proud smile when I tried on her pearls as a little girl, came back to me like shards of glass scattered on the floor. How could something as small as a jeweled cap suddenly feel heavier than the entire weight of my childhood? I picked up the phone to call her, to demand an explanation, but my hand froze halfway. the image of her cool, practiced smile flashing in my mind. I knew exactly what she'd say, that I was overreacting, that appearances mattered more, that Phoebe simply looked the part. That phrase kept echoing in my mind. Looked the part. What did that even mean? That I didn't. That my laughter was too loud, my hair too plain, my life too ordinary for her perfect vision. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the engagement ring Daniel had chosen glinting faintly under the warm light, and for a moment, I wondered if I even wanted a wedding anymore. But then his voice came back to me, steady, kind, patient, reminding me that love wasn't supposed to feel like competition. I closed my eyes, trying to picture our life together, but the image kept getting blurred by the sound of my mother's approval landing on someone else's shoulders. The next morning, I showed up at my parents' house with trembling hands and a script in my head, promising myself I'd stay calm. My mother greeted me in that high, cheerful tone she used for neighbors and church guests, not for daughters in pain. She was arranging flowers at the dining table, white lilies, the same kind that always made me sneeze. I stood there in the doorway until she finally noticed me, her eyes widening slightly before she gestured for me to sit. "If this is about the cap," she said before I even opened my mouth. "Arya, please don't make a scene." A scene. That's what she called it when I tried to speak my truth. I swallowed hard, the words sticking in my throat. "It was supposed to be mine," I said quietly. "Grandma told me herself when I was 12. My mother's expression didn't flicker. "You misunderstood. It was always meant for whoever embodied the tradition best." "Meaning Phoebe," I whispered, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Meaning whoever carries themselves with grace," she corrected. And that word, grace, felt like a slap. I stood up before I could cry, before she could see how small she made me feel. My father appeared in the hallway then, awkward and uncertain, a newspaper still in his hand. "Dad," I said, turning to him, desperate for someone to tell me I wasn't imagining things. "Tell me Grandma wanted me to have it." He hesitated, eyes darting between us. "Your grandmother loved you both," he murmured. It wasn't an answer, and it was all I needed to know. I left before the tears could fall, the slam of the door echoing behind me like a final punctuation mark. For days I couldn't focus on work. My coworkers noticed, offering sympathetic smiles I didn't deserve. Even Daniel's attempts to cheer me up, flowers, dinner reservations, soft jokes, felt like distant voices underwater. The wedding plans went on, but every decision felt hollow. My mother took over, of course, insisting on a venue I didn't want, a menu I didn't like, and a dress that made me feel like a stranger in my own skin. When I tried to speak up, she'd smile tightly and say, "Just trust me, dear. You'll thank me later." It was like being erased one decision at a time. A week before the final fitting, I caught Phoebe at the boutique, standing in front of a mirror, the Juliet cap resting delicately on her blonde curls. The light hit her just right, and for a moment, she really did look like one of those magazine brides my mother adored. But when our eyes met in the mirror, guilt flickered across her face. "Arya," she said softly, removing the cap. "I didn't ask for this. Mom just—" "Don't," I interrupted. "Please don't make excuses for her." She looked down, twisting her engagement ring nervously. "I wish she could see you the way Daniel does," she whispered. That sentence broke something in me. I left before she could see the tears spilling down my cheeks. That night, Daniel found me sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by wedding magazines I had torn in half. I told him everything. Every humiliation, every childhood memory of being the backup daughter. He listened quietly, then took my hand. "Then let's make it our own," he said. "No heirlooms, no rules. Just us." It sounded beautiful, almost like freedom. But the next day my mother called again, pretending nothing had happened, inviting us to brunch to finalize details. Against my better judgment, we went. The restaurant was packed, sunlight pouring through the windows, laughter bouncing off the walls. My mother was already seated, perfectly composed, Phoebe beside her, and my father quietly scrolling his phone. When we sat down, she launched straight into her plans. "The photographer will need you both at the house next week," she said, looking at Phoebe. "We'll do family portraits." I froze. "At your house?" I asked. "For my wedding?" She smiled as if the absurdity didn't exist. "Tradition, dear. It's what everyone expects." I glanced at Daniel, who squeezed my hand under the table. Then came the moment that changed everything. The waiter arrived with champagne, and my mother lifted her glass. "To Phoebe," she said brightly, "for helping us bring this wedding together. She's been such a beautiful example of how a bride should carry herself." Laughter rippled through the table, except mine. I felt the room tilt slightly, my breath catching. Everyone's eyes turned toward me, waiting for me to smile, to play along. But I couldn't. I set my glass down and stood up slowly. "You mean my wedding, right?" I asked. My mother blinked, her smile faltering. "Of course, darling." "Don't be so sensitive." The way she said it, like I was a child throwing a tantrum, made heat rush to my face. I wanted to scream, to throw the champagne right there, but instead, I looked at Daniel and saw the answer in his eyes. Quiet strength. Permission to choose myself. I turned back to my mother and said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "You can have your perfect wedding." "I'm done pretending." And then I walked out. I could hear her voice calling my name, sharp and disbelieving, but I didn't turn back. Outside, the air felt different, colder, cleaner, real. Daniel followed a moment later, slipping his jacket around my shoulders. "You okay?" he asked softly. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "But maybe I will be." That night, I sat by the window in our apartment, city lights flickering like small promises in the distance, and for the first time in my life, I felt both terrified and free. But I also knew one thing: my mother wasn't going to let this go quietly. She never did. The next morning, my phone buzzed with her messages. First guilt, then anger, then silence. When she finally showed up at my door uninvited, her face looked different. Pale, controlled. But her eyes, those sharp, assessing eyes, were still the same. She didn't bother with greetings. "You embarrassed this family," she said. "Do you have any idea how people are talking?" "Good," I replied, surprising both of us. "Let them." Her lips parted, speechless for once. "You're making a mistake," she whispered. "No," I said, stepping closer. "I'm ending one." For a moment, she seemed to soften, but then her gaze dropped to my engagement ring, and the ice returned. "Daniel will get tired of this rebellion," she said. "Men like stability, not drama." I didn't respond. I just opened the door and waited until she stepped out. As the door clicked shut behind her, my hands were trembling, but not from fear, from release. I had crossed a line I could never uncross, and somewhere deep down, I knew that whatever came next would redefine everything: my family, my wedding, my life. But as I leaned against the door and felt my heart racing, I also knew something else. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The morning I decided to take back what was mine, the sky was the same soft gray as the morning my grandmother was buried, a strange kind of symmetry that didn't feel accidental. I woke up before dawn, the world still quiet, the air outside carrying that sharp scent of rain that comes before a storm. Daniel was still asleep beside me, his breathing even and steady, and for a moment, I almost let myself sink back into that comfort. But something inside me had shifted too deeply to ignore now. I slipped out of bed, pulled on my coat, and sat at the kitchen table with the box of letters from my grandmother. The ink was faded, but the truth in them felt alive. Her handwriting, her words, her promise, it all felt like she was right there with me, whispering the courage I needed. The cap wasn't just an heirloom anymore. It was a symbol of the generations of silence that my mother had enforced, the quiet obedience she disguised as grace. That morning, I stopped being afraid of breaking her rules. I started being afraid of what would happen if I didn't. By the time the sun rose, I had already made my decision. Phoebe's wedding was 2 weeks away, an event my mother was orchestrating like a royal ceremony, every detail curated for appearances. every moment staged for photographs and whispers of admiration. Invitations had gone out to every distant cousin, every church acquaintance, every business friend my parents had ever wanted to impress. It was going to be their masterpiece, their validation, their stage, and that was exactly where I planned to end it. I didn't want to destroy Phoebe's happiness. I just wanted to reveal the truth they had buried beneath generations of grace. I spent the next few days quietly preparing. Daniel didn't ask questions, but he could sense something in the way I carried myself. Calm, certain, like a woman who had already made peace with what she had to do. When I finally told him, sitting together on the balcony as city lights flickered below us, he didn't try to stop me. He just said, "Make sure you walk away proud, not angry." His faith in me felt like armor. The morning of the wedding arrived crisp and clear, sunlight glinting off the dew-soaked grass of the country estate my mother had rented for the occasion. The air buzzed with the hum of florists, photographers, and distant chatter. I arrived early, dressed simply, no jewels, no extravagance, just a soft ivory dress and my grandmother's letters tucked neatly inside my bag. My mother's face paled slightly when she saw me, but she masked it quickly with that polished smile she had perfected for social occasions. "Arya," she said, as if my name were an inconvenience. "You're early." "You always said punctuality was a virtue," I replied. Her lips tightened, but she said nothing more. Phoebe appeared then, radiant and trembling, her eyes darting nervously between us. For a moment, I saw the little sister who used to crawl into my bed after bad dreams, before our mother's favoritism carved distance between us. I took her hands. "You look beautiful," I said honestly. Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want it like this," she whispered. "I know," I said, "but sometimes we don't get to choose how the truth comes out." She looked confused, but I squeezed her hands once more and left before she could ask what I meant. The ceremony unfolded like a painting. Soft music, delicate petals, the scent of roses everywhere. My mother sat in the front row, proud and composed, her pearls catching the light, her smile sharp as glass. I watched her closely, memorizing every expression. When it was time for the speeches, she took the microphone first, thanking everyone for coming, speaking in that polished, graceful tone that had always fooled the world into thinking she was kindness itself. Then she gestured for Phoebe to come forward, her hand resting proudly on her daughter's arm, and I saw it. The glimmer of the Juliet cap perched perfectly atop Phoebe's golden curls. The sight made my stomach twist, but not with pain, with purpose. When my turn came to speak, my mother's eyes flicked toward me sharply, a silent warning. But I ignored it. I walked to the front, my heels clicking against the marble floor, the letters clutched in my hand. "I wasn't planning to speak," I began, my voice steady, though my heart pounded in my chest. "But there's something I think my grandmother would have wanted everyone here to know." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that stretches thin with tension. My mother's smile froze, her knuckles whitening around the edge of her chair. I unfolded the first letter slowly, my voice soft but clear. "This is in her handwriting," I said. She wrote that the Juliet cap, the one Phoebe is wearing today, was meant for her first granddaughter's wedding. She wrote my name. She promised it to me. A murmur rippled through the crowd, confusion and curiosity blending with disbelief. My mother stood suddenly, her face flushed. "Arya, that's enough," she said sharply, her voice low but trembling. "This isn't the time." I met her gaze and held it. "You're right," I said softly. "It's long past time." Then I turned back to the guests. For years, my mother taught us that grace meant silence. That being a good daughter meant never questioning her version of the truth. But grace without honesty isn't virtue, it's submission. And I'm done pretending submission is beautiful. The words hung in the air, sharp and electric. My mother's mask cracked visibly then, her lips parting as she tried to regain control. But the whispers had already begun. Guests exchanged glances, and Phoebe stood frozen, her hand touching the heirloom like it had suddenly turned to ice. I looked at her gently. "It was never your fault," I said. You just believed what she told you. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded slowly, removing the cap and placing it in my hands. The gesture broke something open inside me, a thread of forgiveness maybe, or just the end of the lie we'd both been living under. I looked at my mother one last time. You wanted a perfect picture, I said. Now everyone can see what perfection cost. And with that, I set the Juliet cap down on the table between us, not out of surrender, but as a declaration. I didn't need to wear it to reclaim what it meant. My grandmother's promise wasn't in the pearls. It was in my voice, my choice, my defiance. I walked out of that hall to the sound of murmurs and rustling fabric, Daniel following quietly behind me. The sun outside was bright, almost blinding after the dim interior. I took a deep breath, the air cool and clean, and for the first time in years, it felt like I could breathe without someone else's permission. Daniel slipped his hand into mine, and I looked up at him, half laughing, half crying. Well, I said, that's one way to end a family tradition. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. You didn't end it, he said. You rewrote it. We left together, driving until the estate disappeared in the rearview mirror. Somewhere along the way, I opened the window and let the wind tangle through my hair, the letters resting safely in my lap. I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt awake. That evening, when the photos from the wedding began to circulate online, the story spread faster than my mother could contain it. People noticed the letters, the confrontation, the truth. And for once, the comments beneath her carefully curated posts weren't praise. They were questions. She tried to spin it, of course, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but the image of her perfect composure had already cracked. Phoebe called me days later, her voice quiet but steady. I gave the cap back to Aunt Vivian, she said. She said it should stay with someone who remembers what it stands for. I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. She's right. I'm sorry, Phoebe whispered. For everything. I thought of all the years we'd been pitted against each other, two daughters taught to compete for the same limited affection. I'm sorry too, I said. Let's not let her win anymore. From then on, I didn't hear much from my mother. She sent one final message, short, cold, predictable. You made your choice. Don't expect forgiveness. I read it once, then deleted it. I didn't need forgiveness from someone who'd never offered love without conditions. The piece that followed wasn't loud or cinematic. It was quiet, like sunlight on the kitchen floor, like laughter that didn't need to be measured. I married Daniel in a small ceremony on a cliff overlooking the sea, barefoot, no veil, no heirlooms, just the sound of waves and wind and the promise of something real. Aunt Vivian stood in the front row, tears in her eyes, and when she hugged me after the vows, she whispered, "Your grandmother would be proud." I smiled, feeling the truth of it settle deep in my chest. Later that night, as the stars came out, I pulled the letters from my bag and read them one last time, the pages soft and worn from how many times I'd held them. I didn't feel anger anymore, only gratitude, for the strength, the clarity, the freedom to finally live without apology. Some families build legacies out of control, I realized, but others rebuild them out of truth. I closed the letters and looked out at the horizon, the ocean stretching endlessly ahead, and whispered to the wind, I'm free now. And for the first time, I truly was.